Going back to the statistics earlier, where we talk about the American Lung Association and anything smaller than 10 microns is the greatest human health risk.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another Change the Air Foundation Summit interview. My name is Kendra Seymour, and I'm joined today by our co-founder, Michael Rubino, who has a fantastic presentation for us today. Thank you so much, Michael, for being here.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, one of the things that I'm really excited for you to talk about today, you're going to talk about how we've never been sicker, basically, as a society, and the role that our indoor air quality may be playing in this illness and rising diseases and things like that, because I know it's important to you and to me and to all of us at the foundation that we are all living our healthiest lives. So I want you to jump right in because I've seen a sneak peek at this and it's good. You guys are going to love it.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So I'm going to dive right in and share my screen, and we'll have some fun with some questions later, I am sure. So this presentation is called Never Been Sicker. I'm Michael Rubino. For those that don't know me, I am a certified microbial remediation supervisor. It's the highest certification you could have in that field. And I've seen a lot of homes, thousands of homes, and I've seen how this affects people in these homes. Today, we know we have sick buildings, and we know that it makes sick people. But just how prevalent are sick buildings and our sick people, I think, is something that we really want to dive into. First off, with sick buildings, the prevalence of mold in buildings is widespread. In a major cross-sectional study conducted by the US EPA of 100 randomly selected office buildings from across the country, we found that 85% of the buildings had past water damage and 43% had current water leaks. So there we have it, folks. 85% of our buildings are problematic. The Occupational and Safety Health Administration estimates that over 25% of homes have had enough water damage to host toxigenic indoor molds. So that's 25% are toxic that they estimate. A better understanding of the presence of molds in the U.S. housing stock comes from a pair of studies conducted by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and the American Healthy Homes Survey, AHHS 1 and 2, performed in 2007 and in 2019. It evaluated randomly selected homes across the country for various health hazards, including lead, radon, asbestos, and mold. Data from this suggests that our homes have significant water damage, resulting in high levels of mold. Furthermore, reviewing the associated prevalence data, it was noted that 34 of the 36 mold species evaluated increased significantly in prevalence between the first and second study, indicating this serious problem is actually getting worse. EPA conducted a study collecting dust and utilizing MSQ PCR technology to quantify 36 different species inside the home. And out of that, we figured out that 33% of homes had Stachybotrys, a toxigenic mold. 50% of homes had elevated Aspergillus. And if you know about Aspergillus, it can produce ochratoxin A. And when we start to look at this, it's very interesting because almost everyone that I've ever seen that has tested for mycotoxins and has tested their home had off the charts levels of ochratoxin A, right? So it's definitely much more prevalent than we can imagine. And 100% of the homes had sampled had Eurotium, right? So which can produce mycotoxins. It's another mold that that is on our radar, and we're creating healthy environments. And this is not good, right? This is showing that we have a pretty significant sick home problem. Causes of sick building syndrome. How do our buildings get sick? Well, we have chemical contaminants, biological contaminants, inadequate ventilation, electromagnetic radiation, poor and inappropriate lighting with absence of sunlight, bad acoustics, poor ergonomics, and humidity. Now, it's really interesting because we don't really think about really any of these things, and so it's really important that we start to understand what creates this opportunity for our buildings to get sick and what exactly do we have to look out for. The EPA studies of human exposure to air pollutants indicate that indoor levels of pollutants may be 2 to 5 times and occasionally more than 100 times higher than outdoor levels. So basically, since we spend 90% of our time indoors, we are inhaling a ton of more particulate matter than we would if we were outside. That's why so many people feel sick inside their own homes, but when they leave their homes, they feel better. The EPA and its Science Advisory Board consistently rank indoor air pollution among the top 5 environmental health risks to the public, which is crazy because if you go out to your supermarket right now and do a little survey, people have no idea, right, that this is such a big problem. I started doing a deep dive into some of the statistics of sick people, right? Because, as the title says, we have never been sicker than we are today, which makes almost no sense, right? So let's dive into that. Well, in the last 20 years, the prevalence of chronic disease in the United States has grown by a steady 7 to 8 million people every 5 years. 7 to 8 million people. Today, chronic disease affects 50% of the global population, and its care consumers more than 85% of healthcare costs. So just so we understand, chronic disease, chronic illness, which affects 50% of the global population, costs 85% of our healthcare costs. It has become an epidemic. In the US, over 60% of the population deals with at least one chronic condition, whereas 40% of the population deals with multiple chronic conditions. I want you to think about that for a second. That is 60% of the population deals with at least one chronic condition. It doesn't matter what that chronic condition is. They don't feel well. These numbers are estimated to increase by 99.5% by the year 2050. That means that this is going to double. This 7 to 8 million people every 5 years is going to double by the year 2050. And how is this possible if we have better access to food, water, and medical technology than ever before? And that is something that, this whole presentation is about to dive into. Let's talk about autoimmune disease. The University of Oxford says that 1 in 10 people deal with an autoimmune disorder. Yale University states that the prevalence of autoimmunity is on the rise in the US. Researchers have found a 44% increase in ANA, which is the autoantibody, the antibodies that target self, in lupus in the last 25 years, with 41 million people affected. Autoimmunity occurs when the immune system loses tolerance to the body's own tissues and behaves as if they are infected with a pathogen. In addition, some researchers believe autoimmunity may occur when the immune system overreacts to a pathogen that has entered the body and attacks healthy tissues. Autoimmune diseases are typically caused by mutations in multiple genes, but they can be triggered by environmental factors and stress. So this is very important. They can be triggered by environmental factors and stress. So inflammation is closely associated with autoimmune disorders. Most often it's a symptom of the disorders, but sometimes it's a trigger. Immune diseases are very complex. You can have the wrong genes, but also the wrong microbiome, diet, or environmental factors, said Martin Kriegel. Now, why does that matter? Because we want to really hone in on environmental factors, right? What does cause this stress on the immune system and create this immune response? Where is the opportunity coming from? Cancer Research UK has discovered through research on humans and animals, and 1 out of 10 cases of lung cancer is due to air pollution, both indoors and outdoors, right? They didn't separate between indoors and outdoors. It's just air pollution. This study is helping to pave the way for a new era in molecular cancer prevention. Now, I linked to this study, and there's a ton of resources at the end of this slide that we'll stick on so people can take a look. But really, we understand that mycotoxins can be carcinogenic. This is a study published in June 24, 2022. It's pretty new in the world of studies here. And we're seeing that aflatoxin and ochratoxin A are listed as known human carcinogens in the National Toxicology Program at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Sciences. Now, if you remember earlier, I just talked about how 50% of the homes tested had high levels of aspergillus, which produces ochratoxin A, and ochratoxin A is listed as a known human carcinogen. This is stuff that we just do not know about enough about from just a public standpoint. All right, this is all buried stuff that you have to look for, which is why I put this all together here for everybody. This is really important because we're seeing a rise in cancer. We're seeing that we're now understanding more about how cancers can be outside of just smoking cigarettes, which obviously is the number one cause said to believe. So we want to understand, well, what are the other causes? Because there are tons of people recently that have gotten cancer that never smoked a cigarette in your life. I'm sure many people listening to this have heard of at least one person. And we're trying to understand how is that possible, and we're starting to get these answers. Definitely want to talk about inhalational Alzheimer's and dementia. This is for those that you don't know, Dr. Dale Bredesen. He has an episode on this summit as well. Please tune into this because he's going to go way deeper. Alzheimer's disease has multiple types or staging that are contracted in a variety of ways. Subtype 3 is commonly called the inhalational Alzheimer illness and is caused by specific toxins which bioaccumulate over a period of time. So, which toxins can be inhaled and bioaccumulate? Well, lead, heavy metals, chemicals, bacteria, fungus, and mycotoxins. And of course, bacteria can produce toxins too, right? So, we're just looking at toxins as a whole, and any one of these that bioaccumulate can increase our risk. So, we want to understand the possibility that patients diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease have disseminated fungal infection has been recently advanced by the demonstration of fungal proteins and DNA in nervous tissue from AD patients. So we are seeing an increase in fungal infection, which obviously mold being a fungus is something to be concerned about in our homes, given the fact that so many of our homes have mold. But where do people spend most of their time, right? So why does this matter? EPA says Americans on average spend approximately 90% of their time indoors, where the concentration of some pollutants are often 2 to 5 times higher than typical outdoor concentrations. Just to put that in perspective, by the time we are 40, we'll have spent 36 years indoors. So if we are getting sicker and are spending most of our time on this planet indoors, why aren't we educating ourselves on the importance of our indoor environment? And that is the question that we all need to be asking ourselves. Because it is a huge problem. We are getting sicker and sicker. We've never been sicker. Probably in the next few years, as you can see, by 2050, I'll have to re-record this because we, at that point, will have never been sicker either. But how do we reverse this? Well, I believe personally that, and this is just based upon my experience and all the people I've seen, we have to start doing something and being more vigilant on our indoor environments where we spend most of our time. How does this impact us, right? And I think that's always a big question. You know, a lot of the questions that I get asked, there's always, well, why now? And we'll get to that. There's a slide on that. And, you know, why is this such a big deal? How does this impact us? It's so small, right? Well, according to the American Lung Association, the average human being takes about 20,000 breaths per day. And when we look at this study on particle transport and deposition, the basic physics of particle kinetics, which was April 15 of 2015, this study says that adult humans inhale over 10,000 liters of air per day. So 20,000 breaths, 10,000 liters, right? And we get an understanding of that. Contained within this air are somewhere between 100 billion and 10 trillion particles. That's a lot. A fraction of this astronomically large number of particle deposits on the lung surface. Okay, so a large number of these particles, 100 billion to 10 trillion, get deposited on the surface of the lungs. Pathogenic effects may occur if the deposited particles are not properly dealt with by the lung's defense mechanisms. Well, and the last sentence here, the American Lung Association says particle size matters because anything that is smaller than 10 microns can bypass self-defense mechanisms. So as we put these three things together, which I graciously did for you all, we understand that we take 20,000 breaths per day, which it equates to about 10,000 liters of air per day. And there's 100 billion to 10 trillion particles within that air that we're breathing in. And anything smaller than those 10 microns are going to bypass the self-defense mechanisms. And if it bypasses the self-defense mechanisms, pathogenic effects may occur. So we're starting to loop this all together. And let's talk about mold toxicity. Mold toxicity. It's one of these things in the past 11 years that I've seen so much of. And as a professional in people's homes and talking to people, but I'm not a doctor, right? And so when you talk to doctors, a lot of doctors, I would say a large majority of doctors, in fact, don't understand mold toxicity, don't think that it's a real diagnosis or a real traumatic experience that people go through. Well, the World Health Organization seems to think so. In fact, there's an ICD-10 code, Z77.120. And that ICD-10 code is for contact with and suspected exposure to mold toxic, which is a medical classification listed by the World Health Organization under the range and factors influencing health status and contact with health services. So doctors don't believe it. World Health Organization recognizes it. And I would argue that World Health Organization is probably the organization with world global health that everybody looks up to. Talking about mold toxicity in the media, which is another issue here, the media has sensationalized toxic black mold. And the big problem with that is it makes us think that only Stachybotrys shatarum is dangerous. And that is what people are referencing when they say toxic black mold. They're referencing Stachybotrys shatarum. But when we look at the illnesses we already know about, like aspergillosis, which is an infection caused by aspergillus, why are we only sensationalizing black mold when aspergillus is typically white in color, for example? We also have mucormycosis, which is a serious but rare fungal infection caused by a group of molds called Mucormycetes. Now, we say rare, but Google mucormycosis in India right now, and you will find articles about, in the period of 2020 when people were spending more time indoors than ever before during the COVID pandemic, which was obviously a global pandemic. Many people were dying of mucormycosis. So it's not as rare as we think. It is rare probably in the US, but in other parts of the world, definitely not that rare. And the mortality rate is 54%. So not good. And this is another type of mold. Then we have mycotoxicosis, which are acute and chronic toxic diseases caused by mycotoxins. Now, again, mycotoxins are produced by certain species of mold, and it doesn't have to be black mold. Aspergillus, typically a white mold, can produce mycotoxins, ochratoxin A, which we covered earlier. Their clinical features, target organs, and outcome depend on the intrinsic toxic features of the mycotoxin and the quantity and length of exposure, as well as the health status of the exposed person. So we know this. It is a known disease, okay? And we understand that the quantity and the length of exposure is important because that definitely helps define an outcome. But why aren't we talking about mycotoxicosis that we can get in our own homes, right? Because most of what you will find out there is talking about how we are concerned about exposure to food. But let's go back to 20,000 breaths per day. Let's go back to anything smaller than 10 microns. Mycotoxins would be 0.1 microns, definitely smaller than 10 microns. And then let's talk about what is the greatest route of exposure for environmental toxins on this planet. What did we learn from COVID-19? We learned that air transmission is the greatest route of exposure for environmental toxins and microbiological contaminants. So we should be more concerned about mycotoxins getting exposed through by mold in our homes than we should be by eating some moldy peanuts. And I just want to say that profoundly. Here's the other confusing thing from a media perspective. Mycotoxins can be produced by molds that are not toxigenic, but mycotoxins are toxic. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but essentially aspergillus is an allergenic mold. So it's not a toxic mold, but it produces mycotoxins, which are toxic. So we have some confusing semantics here, people. The point being, if we have mold in our home that can produce mycotoxin, it is toxic. We want it out of our homes. Why now? I love this question. Probably my favorite question to get asked is like, well, it's been around forever. Why now? We've seemed to have never been affected. Well, first off, there's a mold remediation protocol in the Bible, Old Testament. Check it out, Leviticus, because we've known that mold is a problem. We've been destroying homes for it for as long as we can remember. Now, in American history, we're going to talk about something which is really interesting, which is why I think we compound this problem and why I think the numbers are getting worse over time and not better. Well, in the 1970s, when Richard Nixon was president, we were dealing with an energy crisis. And this is how we started going in the direction of energy efficiency. So since the 1970s, homes have been getting built tighter and tighter, which means that less particles escape from indoors to outdoors and less dilution of air, which means that more particles enter our bodies with each breath that we take, 20,000 times per day. According to the CDC, life expectancy at birth in the United States declined nearly a year from 20 to 2021, according to new provisional data from the CDC's National Center for Health Statistics. That decline went from 77 to 76.1 years, which took the US life expectancy at birth to its lowest level since 1996. Yeah. Why are things going in the wrong direction? That's what we're asking ourselves here. So where do we go from here? Well, obviously we have some amazing episodes for you guys to watch and understand more about how to take control into your own hands. And this is for your home because you can control your environment. But we obviously have a pretty large problem systemically across our country and across the world. So first thing that you can do is you can help us by supporting legislation such as the Healthy at Home Act of 2023, which changed the Air Foundation worked closely with the congressional offices to ensure the Healthy at Home Act would provide research, standard setting, accountability, financial support, and education for tenants that will improve the health, safety, and overall habitability for our country's housing. This is a federal bill, folks, and Brandon Chapo has been working tirelessly at our foundation to make this happen with the congressional offices. You can volunteer at Change the Air to help propose new bills in your state. I might be botching this number because it changes so often, but I think we have 12 bills that have been actively been proposed in states. And it's a lot of work, guys. It doesn't just get passed and all is fine and good. Sometimes bills they can take years to go through a changes. Obviously, both parties have to kind of meet in the middle and agree upon the language inside these bills. And what we need to do as citizens, we need to tell our congressional offices that this matters to us, that we want them to do something about it, because that's how we get change. We need to donate to Change the Air to help us fund research, policy reform, and education programs. This is not going to happen off of just myself, Kendra, Brandon, the rest of the team. We need your help. We can't do this alone. We have done a great job so far with the limited resources we have. We are 100% volunteer. And we have moved mountains so far. And it's honestly incredible. And I can't imagine how every day we're able to accomplish what we're able to accomplish. And that's why we need your help. We can't do this alone. I beg you to share this event with friends, family, and loved ones so they too can learn how important indoor air quality is to our health and well-being. Together, we're going to build a brighter, happier, and healthier future. This isn't my legacy. This is our legacy. We have the ability, with the information that we know, with the things that we are able to accomplish, to leave this world with a better place than when we found it. And that's what this is all about. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to watch this episode. Honestly, there's so much information. It's really hard to compile this into such a short presentation here. I'm going to go to the next slide where you can look at some of the studies that I have found that helped me put together this presentation, which are really important. I think when you start to see all the things that we are seeing here at the foundation level, when you're seeing how important air quality is to human health, it is just not ignorable at that point. Once we know about it, we have to do something about it, and that's where we're at. So thank you.
Mike, thank you so much for that. I think it's so, when you see it laid out like that, it really is kind of shocking, because the fact of the matter is, and not to harp on this point, we are spending more time than ever indoors, breathing in air that's potentially bad for your health. And if you're a betting person, if you go to Vegas, chances are, if you're listening to this, right, you're telling us that more than likely you are sitting in a home with past or current water damage and mold, right? Am I understanding those statistics right?
Statistically speaking, yes.
Yeah. So those aren't good odds, right? But I guess my question then to you is, we have all this data, a lot of it from our own government and universities and research. Why aren't there more alarm bells, in your opinion, be sounded by healthcare practitioners, policymakers, and such?
I think that the industry of air quality has failed us. I think that's the bottom line. Even to this day, Most professionals think that if they go inside the home and take an air sample in the center of the home, that is a screening tool. That tells us all the data we need to know. So when we start looking at older studies and older data sets, a lot of these data sets are not being represented properly. When the EPA started using MSQ PCR technology to understand what contaminants we're being exposed to by testing the dust, that was the best thing that could have ever happened. And I know they kind of put together that study and they really haven't picked it up or touched it since. Matter of fact, when people started using the technology, specifically the scoring algorithm, they put out a statement saying that this is for public research and people should not be using the scoring algorithm professionally. And they're correct. That scoring algorithm is far from perfect. But the data, MSQ PCR technology, and the data around what you can test for is invaluable. And I think a lot of professionals don't understand the data, don't understand how to use the data. And I'll tell you, after 11 years, I'm still learning every day on how do we use this data. But the point is that I understand more about people's exposure and what their homes are creating, utilizing that data to look for abnormalities, to figure out what might they be what might be going on in their home that might be influencing their health. And I think that is really the step forward for the future. And obviously, we're going to keep developing technology and we're going to keep learning and we're going to get better and better. But we have advanced significantly um, over the past 3-4 decades. And I will tell you that most people are still operating off antiquated principles. And I think that is what is such a big issue here because you have people, and people make up doctors and people make up government officials and people make up families. And it doesn't matter what our professions are, we rely on experts. When I go to a doctor and I'm not feeling well, I rely on them as an expert to help me to figure out what's going on. And so when government officials and consumers and families call these experts, they're relying on their expertise. And when their expertise is not so expert because it's operating off of antiquated practices or principles, well, then we're missing the mark on finding the problems. And so there's a lot that has to happen, I think, from that standpoint, where we can start to really look at new standardizations, new principles, new practices, new procedures, new guidelines, regulations, all of that. And I think we're going there. We're going in that direction.
Yeah, you touch on something I want to circle back to because it really is at the heart of why we started Foundation. When we first got together and we were talking about it, it's about empowering the consumer, the person sitting there listening to these summit episodes, because like you said, you may go to your doctor, you may go to your remediator, you may go to whoever, and they may in fact be operating on outdated information. And so the best thing you can do right now, and I'm sure you agree, is to learn as much as you can, to become empowered so you can become your own advocate. And that's one of the things we've set out to do at the foundation and with this summit, is to provide you with that reliable and accurate information. Now, someone listening to this without getting into a whole nother summit episode, because you do some other great talks and we have some other people, they're seeing this and they're thinking, okay, a lot of these pollutants are invisible, they're odorless, they're colorless, I can't see them. How do I know if they're there? What do I even do about it? It's such a big problem. I want to stick my head in the sand. Just high level, what's the first step someone could take today? If they want to see if something's going on in their home, what would you tell them?
You test your dust. It is the best screening tool. And the reason being is because you might have problems behind walls. You might have problems behind ceilings in your HVAC system. These problems might not be abundantly obvious, but yet they're constantly creating particles and toxins. And these particles and toxins get into our body with every time that we take a breath, 20,000 times per day. And what's interesting about these particles is they're so light, they don't actually travel very far. And I would kind of think about it like if you were to take a puff of a cigarette and blow it out of your mouth, right? That smoke is going to travel probably somewhere between 3 and 6 feet. And then it's just going to kind of float there and you'll see a little haze. And what happens is when the particles are that light and that small, that's exactly what's happening. And then they bind to our dust. And where is our dust? Freaking everywhere. Turn off all your lights, go into a dark room, put a flashlight up in front of your face like this and see all the dust floating in the air. Or go sit near a window on a sunny day and watch that ray of light refract off all the particulate in the air. It's a lot. And so this stuff kind of sits closely to where the source is, which is typically closer to the wall, not the center of the room, right? So we're missing a lot of this stuff. But then it binds with our dust, becomes part of our dust, distributes evenly amongst our home, obviously depending on how big our home is. But then we're constantly breathing it in, and our dust moves. It doesn't just stay stagnant. Every time we open a door, we're creating pressure that's going to move our dust around. Every time the HVAC system kicks on, it's going to create pressure and move our dust around. And our body is then our biggest home's air filter at that point. And that's really what the issue is. I'm going back to the statistics earlier where we talk about the American Lung Association, and anything smaller than 10 microns is the greatest human health risk because it bypasses their self-defense mechanisms. Well, toxins, allergens, bacteria, mold, VOCs, you name it, it's all smaller than that. And that's where the problem is.
Yeah, the smaller the particle, the deeper into your body it can go. So, Mike, we have to wrap up here because I know we're over time, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and I can't wait for you guys to enjoy the rest of the summit.
Yeah, for everyone listening, do us a favor. Tell your friends, tell your family, share this with somebody in your life. We have lots of resources for those looking to test or inspect your home, remediate, everything from source removal to we have episodes on improving your ventilation to filtration. And so it's all about helping you feel empowered so that you can make that connection between your health and your home and hopefully live a healthier and a longer life. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.